As I said, I'm Fiona. I'm one of the Improvement Advisors with the Care Inspectorate. Welcome you all today to our webinar on supporting meaningful connection and why it's important, and also looking at Anne's Law. I appreciate time is precious at the moment wherever we're working and how busy we all are. I really appreciate taking the time out today to join us. I also appreciate that we're talking about COVID today and what's been happening during the pandemic. And just to reassure you that we are more than aware that a lot of the issues that came up during the pandemic are still there. We're still having to deal with them on a daily basis, and it's a challenge. It's an ongoing thing for us all to have to deal with. So we just want to appreciate or reaffirm that we appreciate the time that you've taken out today. Okay, let me change the slide. So I'd like to introduce you to the presenting team today. So like I said, I'm Fiona. I'm joined today by Sherry Kerr and Barbara Lawson. There's Barbara, who are both inspectors. Hi, Sherry. They're both inspectors with the Care Inspectorate who have been seconded on to the Anne's Law project. So we'll be hearing from both of them about their work later on. Also in the background today, we've got supporting ourselves, and we've got Louise and Anij, who work with myself in the Health and Social Care Improvement team. They'll be helping keep a track of all your comments. And the most important person in the background is Jenny, who makes sure that everything's running smoothly, all the information's up to date, and making sure that our cameras are working as required. So it's great to have you all with us, and just want to put a thanks out there to you all who's supporting the webinar, without whom we couldn't be doing this. So what we're going to be looking at today, we've got the points as you can see on the screen. And for those of you who've been involved in the Care About Physical Activity or CAPA programme, either through the webinars or the workshops, you'll know that we're always talking about the importance of finding out what's meaningful and important for those that we're working with and those experiencing care. And once we find out what's important to them, to enable people to achieve this or support them to achieve this as much as they can. One thing that we're very aware of is that participating in meaningful activity has also shown that it can increase life expectancy. And research has also shown that one of the main reasons that people enjoy engaging activities is to stay socially connected. On that note, I just want to give you a wee bit of interest of what we're talking about today. My late mother-in-law had quite advanced dementia, and this is talking about the importance of connection and knowing what's important to people. So she was in a care home, and she was at the stage that we weren't getting a lot of information from her. She was very rarely talking, had her eyes closed most of the time, but still aware that she was listening and taking things in. And she was a cat lover, absolutely loved her cats. I mean, when I met my husband, I discovered that I liked cats. I had previously really not liked cats. I've got 3 now. So I decided to sit and chat to her about the cats and all the antics they'd been up to and all the cats that she'd had before. And I must have blethered on for about 10 minutes. And then when I stopped, I said, "Listen, I better stop talking. I've been blethering on about this." And she opened one eye and looked at me and went, no, it's all right. I'm enjoying this. And it was the most we'd had out. She spoke for weeks, and that was the last time we really heard much conversation from her. So it doesn't matter at what stage people you're working with, whether they're living with dementia, maybe they're not, but that having that importance of a connection and being able to hone in on that is vastly important for everybody. But of course, COVID has had a devastating impact on this, especially with the socially distanced and visiting restrictions that have been put in place. And subsequently, people living in care homes or receiving care at home or daycare services were unable to access other means of psychological and psychosocial support, which has led to adverse effects on their social functionings and their mental health. So hopefully you'll all manage to scan the QR code. So what I'd like to do is just put in one-word answers, could put in a couple of options of what is a meaningful connection for you. What does that mean to you? So if you could put in 1 or 2 answers, that would be great. Oh, that says, and I'll unlock that. There we go. There is just a short time, only 1 minute to be able to do it. And that's just so it keeps me on track of the time. So I see families, and family and friends are the main ones that are coming through. Spending time with the family. Communication, outdoors, absolutely, especially now the weather's getting a wee bit warmer. Interesting conversation, yep, shared moments. Togetherness, absolutely. That's one of the things I love about using the word cloud when we're doing this, is you can see the main ones that are come up, and it would appear that family and friends, you know, are at the centre of all of this for everybody. Feeling heard, intimacy, absolutely. Hugely important things. Sorry, I've got another screen here, that's what I'm looking at, in case you're wondering, in case you thought I was looking out the window. Fab, thank you. That's brilliant. It's lots of things in there. Family and friends, like I said, pets, hugs. Hugs are vastly important. Belonging, enjoyment. Great. Listen, thank you so much for everybody that's put a comment in there. And we're going to do the same thing again. But this time, the question being, what might be the outcome for us if we don't have connection? Again, just one word answers if possible. A lot of people agreeing it's all very negative. And that's, you know, it's all bad effects it has on us if we don't have that connection. Big ones coming through: loneliness, isolation, depression. It's funny, it's trying hard to read these sometimes when the shape keeps moving. Sadness, deterioration of well-being, absolutely. Just a couple of more seconds if anybody else wants to add anything. Great. Listen, thank you again so much for putting that in. So we can see the main ones coming out there are isolation, loneliness, depression, sadness, lack of motivation. Yeah, all completely relevant, and still things that are going on today, even though we've come out at the end of the pandemic, so to speak. It's not gone away. So I'm now going to pass you over to Barbara, who will talk us through this next section.
Okay,
Thanks, Barbara.
Great to see everyone today. And we're going to be speaking about meaningful connection. So the information we are sharing about connection has come from findings from a literature review that we carried out to inform our work on the Anne's Law project. And we're going to tell you a bit about the project later on in the webinar. So meaningful contact with friends and family is fundamental to people's health and well-being, and is integral to their human right to a private and family life. Meaningful engagement is essential to ensuring a good quality of life. Social relationships allow people to feel valued as individuals and empowered as partners in care. The variety of relationships people have and the people they engage with all have the potential to bring something and contribute to the relationship in a unique way, which can then affect people's lives positively or negatively. And with this in mind, human relationships which bring meaningful social connection are a powerful vehicle to improve psychosocial well-being. It's widely accepted that older people experience loneliness and social isolation. Research indicated that older people living in care homes have been shown to experience both moderate and severe loneliness. We were impacted by how profound the effect of social isolation and loneliness can be for older people, and especially those living in care homes. Although some of the information is focusing on care homes, that's because Anne's Law is specifically related to that. However, there are principles that are transferable to every setting, and when Sherry comes in later on, she'll be making reference to some different settings as well. But we all benefit from meaningful connection. It's not just people in care homes or older people. I'm sure we've all experienced a degree of loneliness and social isolation as a result of the pandemic. So let's look at how connection impacts our physical health and well-being. If you can put that slide up, please, Fiona. Okay, so loneliness, as we've said, is a major health problem for older people and is associated with a range of negative health consequences, including depression, dementia, cardiovascular disease, malnutrition, poor quality of life, and increased mortality. Perceived social isolation can trigger a physiological response in some neuroendocrine systems, which can affect the brain. And in its simplest terms, it overstimulates responses in the body, which affect production of stress hormones. It also weakens the immune system and increases inflammatory responses, which can be a predisposing factor in some chronic conditions, including arthritis. So if we think about the perceived social isolation, so every time we thought there was going to be another lockdown and we didn't know when we would see people, this perceived sense of social isolation was impacting all of our bodies. Biological factors can be triggered by loneliness and can also lead to the progression of symptoms of dementia and mild cognitive impairment, which can lead to physical decline. The physiological changes that can occur in our bodies when faced with ongoing stress, strain, and trauma can significantly impact our health and well-being. The research explored how the progression of chronic conditions led to many older people being further isolated due to reduced mobility, pain, and lack of support with many age-related conditions, and was also found to lead to reduced life expectancy. One practical example is an older woman who was experiencing a flare-up of her arthritis, but she had also recently suffered a small stroke which affected her speech and movement in her arm. She was not able to communicate with staff in her usual way. This meant she could not ask for additional medication, which left her in pain, and she stayed in bed more. This resulted in her not being able to attend the music group and meet her friends for coffee. She could also not use the iPad independently anymore or adjust her electric bed. Staff did not notice this due to changes in the staff team, and her care plan had not been updated. Okay, we'll move on to emotional. So the distress caused by lack of touch, and what one article was referring to this as skin hunger, has left lasting effects. Skin hunger could be explained as the need for touch. Several reasons for people's experiences of loneliness were found, but most commonly it was due to the lack of contact with their relatives and other people important to them. They missed physical contact with people and hugs. Some people made comparisons to feeling like they were in prison or remembering the effects of World War II. People reported there was not much to look forward to each day when there was no planned visits, and also when there weren't planned activities in the care home. The lack of opportunity for people experiencing care to receive comfort, reassurance from others, and touch has contributed to their general decline. This also included lack of meaningful contact and reassurance from staff. Many staff were fearful and held back offering comfort and emotional support to people even when they were distressed, often trying to communicate with a mask at a doorway. And I'm sure we can all think back to how distressing this was for everybody involved, including the staff. Social connections can therefore lead to positive outcomes for people in relation to their mood and emotions. And all of the examples and the information that we're sharing has all come out of this literature review, which will be published in due course on our website. So let's move on to the mental outcomes, mental health outcomes. Okay, so social connection in relation to mental health outcomes was the focus of a review paper that indicated these were diverse. I've listed a few here. This included depression, mood, affect and emotions, anxiety, medication use, anxiety about death, boredom, suicidal thoughts, and daily crying. Loneliness among older people was also noted to be associated with self-neglecting behaviours. A study looking at the impact of visiting restrictions on family carers and people living with dementia also found family carers experienced negative outcomes. This included social isolation, strain, and reduced quality of life for the family carers. When eventually able to visit the care home, family carers noticed dementia progression, with 51% of people reporting an increase in dementia-associated responsive behaviours since the pandemic began. Family carers felt that if they had been able to visit and provide support, they could have supported people with managing the behaviours using non-pharmacological means. They were also concerned at the potential adverse effect of antipsychotic medication that had been used for these associated behaviours for people living with dementia when they were unable to receive the reassurance and support they needed. If family carers had been able to support their loved ones during additional essential visits, they could have supported them with purposeful walking or going outside into enclosed gardens, or provide additional comfort which could have reduced the experience of stress and distress. Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Barbara. That was great. We appreciate that. So, folks, back to our phones again. If you've come off your mobile phone, the QR code is still in the chat. You can get it there. So, where you've been working, what has worked well where you are to support connection for the people that you're working with?
Right, so what we can see here, hi, Louise here. I'm just pitching in to have a look and see what people are talking about here. And we can see that what's worked well is that folk are really talking about technology, and certainly we all got used to using technology over the period of lockdowns and so on, and I know that many people are continuing with that. So there's things like WhatsApp and FaceTime and technology and so on. So that's one aspect that people have learned to use, and many of us, whatever age we are, learning to do that. And then there's some lovely things like up a bit was involving families and absolutely trying to go against that dark place that Barbara was talking about, and moving away from that and moving towards positive physical and emotional and mental health through ensuring that further up the way, I think it says, family members being made welcome, and really having a focus on that to make sure that you're building those positive relationships, and that people experiencing care have the possibility of making those meaningful contacts. And of course, as Barbara was saying, Anne's Law in particular, relates to care homes. But if you're working in a daycare centre, if you're working in a sheltered housing, if you're providing a care at home support, it's really important to know about all of the different things that that can support positive connection for folk. So I'm not sure, can we go down a wee bit, or maybe onto finding out what's important to people? Absolutely. And that's a huge one, because the more that we find out what's important, like what's important to me is going to be very different from what's important to you. So if I'm being supported wherever, finding out what's important to me, and then ensuring that that's top of the list of things that staff are going to work on. And people who care, understand, listen, and adapt to change. Okay, around COVID and technology has welcoming people into the home. That's a care home. Activities and visiting, and really, a focus on really focusing in on this idea about meaningful contact and trying to get away from that loneliness and social isolation. staff giving hugs and touch as well. And I'm sure encouraging others to do as well. Oh, there's a lovely one there about checking ears aren't blocked with wax, glasses are clean and hearing aids are working. Like that story that Barbara told us about, that if you're disconnected from the world because of your hearing, your eyesight and so on, that it's very difficult. It's very easy to step back and step back and step back and not having that connection, so that when things are happening about you or there are people in that you're not really able to connect with what's going on. Online talks and lectures, yes. Oh, I love that one. Utilizing visitors' skills. So inviting people in. And Barbara talked about the variety of relationships, and they can contribute in a unique way. So absolutely trying to really focus in on how do we make this nurturing environment? How do we ensure that if we're supporting somebody at home and you're noticing that they're very socially isolated, how can you suggest that they connect up with other people, that the things that are important to them, that it's connecting up with other people around and about. And there's a couple there about local schools and nurseries writing and drawing pictures for residents. And what's really nice to see is local children and nurseries and so on starting to come back into care services and having those lovely connections. And there's pen pal groups there as well. Music as well. Oh yes, and was there one about animals? Oh, Penny Ascot. So and a comment there about the recognition about, oh my goodness, the difficulty when family members, when the doors were closed. And as Anne's Law will say, as you'll hear later on, it is so important to keep these doors open, and how to do that in a safe way, but focusing in on the qualities that we're moving, really focusing in on what helps the physical, emotional, mental support of people who are experiencing care, and dogs there. So Fiona, there's so much there, but I think I'll leave it there.
That's brilliant, Louise. Thank you so much. Thanks for summarising and going over that. And I know it's not easy, especially when I'm moving the page up and down and you have no control over what I'm doing. So thank you very much. Okay, so I am now going to pass you over to Sherry, who's going to take us through the next section. Thanks, Sherry.
Thanks, Fiona. Can you hear me okay?
Yep, all good.
Yep, perfect. Okay, so yeah, hi everyone, and thanks very much for all your contributions there. Some really good ideas coming through, and obviously lots of good work going on. So the next part of the webinar is around focusing in on a few specific areas, although they are all interlinked, which can impact on meaningful connection, and looking at some issues that might arise and some hopefully simple and practical ways that we can make a difference. And it may well be that you're doing lots of these already, in which case great, but hopefully we might spark some new ideas as well. So if we could change the slide, please, Fiona. Okay, so we've already touched on this in the chats, thinking about sensory impairments. We know that when people experience sensory impairments, such as hearing or visual impairments, this very often affects their ability to connect with other people. That leads to an increased risk of social disconnection and isolation, with all those associated health and well-being problems that we heard about earlier, and can very often result in increased stress and distress for people. Even a mild hearing impairment, for instance, has been shown to have a major impact on people's social functioning and their quality of life. But sensory impairments can often go undetected or can just be seen as an expected part of aging. So important that people have regular visual and hearing assessments carried out, just to find out if there are any issues or changes, identify any aids or adaptations that might be needed to help people communicate better. So to illustrate that, I'll just read out a quote from one older lady living in a care home, and what she said was, "I don't interact very much with the others because of my hearing and my sight. I stay here in my room most of the time. I have my meal in here because I go to the dining room and you sit around a table and everybody is speaking very quietly and you can't hear them." So just illustrating that risk of social disconnection that can often result from sensory impairments. Evidence has shown us that when people are treated as though they are incapable of social interaction, because it's hard to communicate with them, they will tend to withdraw and stop trying, which obviously is likely to then become a vicious circle. So important to think carefully about the kinds of barriers to communication that people might be experiencing, how those can best be addressed, and of course making sure that's incorporated into people's personal plans. For example, simple things, just like making sure that someone has the right glasses on for a particular task, such as eating a meal or doing an activity, whether that's in a care home, a daycare setting, or in their own home, can make a big difference in how successful and enjoyable that experience is for people, and can make people much more likely to participate. If people are being picked up from home for daycare, making sure they have their glasses, hearing aids, spare batteries, etc., ready for the day, just to maximise their experience and their ability to communicate. Speaking of hearing aids, they're obviously very easy to lose, but you can now get an app for iPad or smartphone that can track their location, making life a lot easier for everybody and supporting better communication for people. In a communal setting, thinking about how the layouts and the environment supports or doesn't support people to communicate with each other. So things like how much background noise is there, how is the seating arranged to facilitate people to hear each other better, and so on, can really make a big difference. Can we get the next slide, please, Fiona? Okay, so moving on to talk a bit about the mealtime experience. For most people throughout our lives, mealtimes, of course, are not just about getting nutrition, but are often a really important, familiar, social part of every day, when we have opportunities to catch up with our families and friends, chat about the day and what's going on, and so on. They're a natural point of interaction for people. And for people who use residential or day services, where meals are eaten communally, there can be a really great opportunity for building and sustaining those social relationships with each other and a sense of community that can really enrich people's day-to-day lives. There are lots of things that can help support increased interaction at mealtimes. Things like making sure that people have choices about where to sit and who with, or if people aren't able to decide this, thinking about who they sit beside in a care home or daycare setting can help people to make connections. For example, one lady said that she always sat at meals with 3 men who weren't very able to communicate, and she would have preferred to be able to sit somewhere else, but didn't feel confident about broaching the subject with staff because she felt it had just become expected that she would always sit at that table, and she didn't want to be a nuisance by asking for a change. Environmental factors, like having menus on the tables or different mealtime themes, can be a really good trigger for conversation between people. Involving people who want to and are able to help prepare or serve food, or to lay the table, for instance, in whatever ways they're able to manage, also encourages interaction and really supports people's personhood and their sense of value and self-worth. When staff and people who use the service have the opportunity to eat together, to share meals together, helps them to get to know each other better, supports conversation around the table, and strengthens relationships. And as mentioned in the last slide, thinking about and trying to minimise any barriers associated with sensory impairments can also make a big difference to people's experiences. There's plenty of evidence from research to show that increased social engagement is linked with overall better nutritional intake. But on the other hand, feelings of isolation or loneliness can really negatively impact how much people are consuming, which of course can have serious negative effects on their overall health. When people's family members want to and are able to share some meal times with their loved ones, including providing assistance with eating when that's what's needed, that has also been shown to often result in improved nutritional intake and a generally better experience for people. Some care homes, though, do still operate protected meal times, and relatives are discouraged from coming in at those times. But of course, families have often shared meals together for a lifetime, and having the ability to continue to do so when that's what people want can really help to reinforce those bonds that people have, as well as supporting people's nutrition. So promoting mealtimes that are sociable and enjoyable occasions can be a really great opportunity to support and promote people's connection needs as well as their nutritional needs. And those two things are in fact very much interlinked. Okay, can we move on to the next slide, please? Okay, so talking about personal planning, good person-centered personal planning is of course a thread that runs through everything in all care settings. In relation to meaningful connection in particular, good personal planning is all about valuing the importance of connection, finding out what people's wishes and needs are in relation to this, planning for how those can best be supported in day-to-day practice. We've all got our own personal recipe for connection, which supports our own health and well-being needs. For instance, some people are outgoing and thrive on group activities and lots of chats. Others might be quieter and value time alone, but they still need those opportunities for connection with others that suits their particular individual needs. So finding out and recording key information relevant to meaningful connection is really important. And this could include things like, who are the important people in people's lives? What can we do to help those important relationships be supported and sustained? What opportunities do people have for developing new friendships and new connections? How do people prefer to communicate? What are some important dates and events for them to celebrate? Any barriers they experience, like sensory or cognitive impairments? Gathering this type of information, making sure it's put into practice effectively, helps people make and keep those connections that really enrich everyday life and make a big contribution to their overall health and well-being. So just to give a specific example related to person-centered planning, one thing which has come up quite a bit in the chat today already and was very relevant for most of us during the pandemic was the use of communication technology to help people stay in touch when they weren't able to meet in person. And there was a massive increase in the use of iPads and so on for video calls, which were a great thing and a lifeline for lots of people. But we know that for other people, sometimes they could just cause added confusion and distress and weren't always a benefit to them or suitable for their individual needs. For example, quoting from the wife of a care home resident with dementia, she said, "So the FaceTime visits really didn't work very well. My husband got so upset and he'd try and kiss the screen of the laptop. He did get agitated because he couldn't touch me or see me properly or anything." So for some people, more old-fashioned or more familiar methods of communication, like phone calls or even writing and receiving cards and letters, did seem to result in better outcomes for people. Thankfully, that's less of an issue now that we don't have those restrictions so much, but there are still times when people aren't able to see each other in person for various reasons, whether that's geography, personal circumstances, or whatever. So it just emphasises that importance of finding out this information about what kind of communication is right for each person, having that recorded in personal plans, making sure that the systems are there to ensure that information is passed on to everyone who needs to know about it at the times when they need to know about it. The personal plan needs to be responsive to changes in people's health and circumstances, how this might affect their ability to maintain their connections. So we mentioned sensory impairments earlier and how much impact they can have, but if someone who lives in a care home, for example, becomes much less mobile, how might that then affect their ability to maintain any friendships they have with other people living in the home? Research has shown that people who aren't able to mobilise independently overall have fewer friendships than people who can. So that again links back to the Kappa principles about the benefits of keeping people active. So I'll now hand back over to Barbara, who's going to give a brief update on Anne's Law. Thanks very much.
Okay, thank you, Sherry. Lots of really practical examples that we can, and I'm sure a lot of the things many people are already doing, but it's always good just to have that refresher. Okay, so I'll tell you a bit about the Anne's Law project first. It was set up with funding from Scottish Government to support the care home sector in preparation for Anne's Law and to promote the vital importance of all types of meaningful connection, community involvement and visiting for people who live in care homes. Our work is grounded in a human rights approach, and we are looking to support learning to allow human rights-based decisions to be made which are grounded in human rights law. As part of our work, we are currently visiting a selection of care homes across Scotland to hear a wide range of voices as to why connection is important, and we will be producing guidance on meaningful connection, which will support the sector, which will be based on the literature findings, but also include the range of voices and examples of good practice from the sector. Next slide, please, Fiona. Okay, so Anne's Law is a planned piece of legislation pending review by Scottish Government, which is intended to protect the rights of adults living in care homes to see and spend time with the people who are important to them in the event of an infectious disease outbreak when public health restrictions are applied. Currently, the legislation is linked to the National Care Services Bill, so we are still unclear as to when this will progress through Parliament. Anne's Law is a result of campaigning by relatives of people living in care homes who were separated from their loved ones during the pandemic, and Anne's Law itself has received widespread public support during the consultation process. The pandemic, of course, put tremendous pressure on care services, who have had an often impossible job of balancing people's needs and rights for meaningful connection against protecting them from the risk of infection. At present, we don't know how the Anne's Law legislation will look, as areas of this are still being amended and discussed with input from representatives from the relatives group. It is, however, reassuring that the planned legislation will ensure a legal framework to enable people to stay connected with their loved ones, even when circumstances are difficult. We wish we'd be able to tell you more about Anne's Law, but until that is actually finalised, we don't know how that's look. But again, we are reassured that the government are moving forward with this. Okay, on to the next slide, please. So you might see on the last slide, we mentioned 2 new health and social care standards. So as an interim measure, the 2 standards were added in March 22. They strengthen the existing standards by setting out a clear expectation that people living in care homes should be able to remain connected to families and friends and see them in person, even in times of crisis, in accordance to current guidance. Families and friends should also be supported to be involved in day-to-day care when this is what people want. The 2 standards were widely supported through public consultation and agreed as an important interim step towards putting the principles of Anne's Law into practice while the legislation is being prepared. What this means is that care homes should be making people aware of how they can stay connected and involved in day-to-day care and offering support to their loved ones through meaningful connection should an infectious disease outbreak occur, such as flu, norovirus, or COVID-19. But it's important to know that any restrictions, if these are in place, should be for the shortest possible time, reviewed regularly and in accordance with public health and open with care guidance. So as part of the Anne's Law team, we will be sharing our contact details later in the webinar, and we would be happy to discuss any aspects of the health and social care standards or the Anne's Law project with people in due course. And further information will also be shared with you of how to stay in touch with ourselves and to be involved in our future work. Thank you, Fiona.
Thanks, Barbara and Sherry. That was great. Thank you so much for your time and helping us with that. So just before, just sort of coming down to our last couple of slides now, I was wondering, going back to the phones just to finish, round us off slightly, is after everything you've heard today, so what do you think you could maybe try at work to enhance meaningful connection, following what you've heard from Sherry and Barbara today and the other experiences that people have had? I'd ask you just to put a few words in via the AHA slides again, please.
Hi everyone, it's Anuj here from the Inspectorate. So just to follow on from Fiona, I've added the QR code again in case anybody needs it in the chat. And as we fill up answers a bit more, I'll hopefully talk through some of what we are hearing from people. I really like that. Nice, simple, really listen. So don't just listen, actually actively really listen to what people are saying, hear the feeling behind the words, involving family more in day-to-day care if they wish, challenge the perceived norms. Brilliant. Looking at multiple mechanisms communication, ensuring the communication is positive. Lots of really useful practical thoughts and examples, responding to needs and wishes of people, listening and supporting, thinking more about where people are sitting at meals. Yeah, that's a good one as well. Make sure we don't close our doors again. Good. Yeah, absolutely. We need to figure out ways of having more movement, meaning, and purpose while trying to keep people safe rather than go with the let's close doors and see if that works. Making sure person-centered care is carried out. Yeah, and making sure our care is person-centered, not just in name but in action. Challenging attitudes, following up requests. Good. The word listen comes up so many times because it's funny because we all think we listen, but we don't really always listen. So it's good to see everyone kind of honing in on that. Encouraging family to be involved at meal times, absolutely. And some of these things we used to just do in care settings, and then unfortunately the pandemic came and we kind of started doing the opposite of what we naturally as carers have always felt the right thing to do is. So it's good to start thinking about getting back to that, coaching and encouraging other staff members to do the same, absolutely. And role modeling, especially if you're a senior member of staff will take a lot of their lead from you. So, if you can role model that, living the values of social care, brilliant. Maximize opportunities. Yeah, lots and lots of really positive things to read here when we talk about trying to enhance meaningful connection. Making support plans meaningful as well, and it goes in really well with what Barbara and Sherry have been saying about personal planning as well. It kind of has to ensure that our personal plans have that clear, meaningful information that tell us people what really does matter to people who we are supporting, and stop medicalizing social care. Absolutely, we are a separate specialization in ourselves, and the medical model doesn't always fit with the holistic approach that we want to have in provision of social care. Afternoon parties, yeah, brilliant. um and yeah, goes back down to that person-centered approach to the individual person. Brilliant. Would you scroll further to see if there's other things, establishing community connections again? Absolutely. And that's the kind of key thing, isn't it? So a lot of the community connections were severed, and it's slowly and steadily picking up again. But the more we seek community connections, more community connections will start coming back up again. So like kind of developing that positive circle of seeking more, trying to establish more, and seeking more community connection for our service users. Don't be passive, speak up. Often the users themselves need someone to advocate for them. Absolutely true, very true. We need to advocate for all the right things. We need to fight and argue in our services for all the right things about what matters to our residents and how we need to ensure they get that. Encouraging visiting more, updating training, absolutely, absolutely. Encouraging family to participate in group activities in the home, absolutely. Again, going back to what we used to do and it used to work really, really well, making family a part of the care home family or the care service family. And don't assume residents will actually ask for something. Be there to start discussions. Yeah, and sometimes even also about conversation don't always have to make sense. They have to make connection, and those two things are not always inclusive. So just making sure that you take that opportunity to start having discussions with the residents, getting them comfortable to speak to you about anything and everything, and stop feeling scared. Absolutely brilliant, absolutely brilliant. I think I'll pick on one more and then we'll stop because I think there were so many fun things here, but we kind of need to move on to the next bit. So trying to engage further with the extended families. I really do like the concept, especially within a care home. It was more thinking of a family rather than a team and staff and residents and families. Encourage people to visit more. Don't leave their loved ones in isolation. Absolutely. And positive risk taking. I'll definitely finish with that. Positive risk taking is key. So stop thinking about the harms from doing more, but what the harms are from not doing enough.
Thanks,
Cool.
Anuj.
Thank you,
That was
Fiona.
great. I didn't expect so many responses there. That was brilliant.
That's amazing.
So everybody, we're just coming to the end now of the webinar. Jenny is going to pop the feedback form link into the chat. This has been an improvement webinar, so if you could take the time just to fill in the feedback form, that would be great, and it'll also let us shape future webinars. I saw in the chat a few people are asking if this will be sent out, so the recording will be sent out to people. So that'll get sent out, as well as some of the links that we've been talking about. So we'll send out, within that there'll be a form where you can sign up for the Anne's Law mailing list, as well as links to the health and social care standards, information about technology enabled care and personal planning. And while I've got everybody here, I'd also like to make you aware that we've got another webinar coming up on the 4th of April. It's a longer webinar this time. It's between 2 and 4 o'clock. It's all about promoting equality and meaningful and purposeful engagement. So again, linking into what we were doing today, talking about connection, and purposeful activity and meaningful activity, this will let you sort of understand why these sort of things are important, and also how we can engage everybody that we're working with into be engaged with meaningful and purposeful activities. So on behalf of the team, I'd like to thank you all very much for attending today. Really, again, appreciate you taking the time. Special shout out thank you to Sherry and Barbara for sharing all their knowledge, to Louise and Anuj for helping sum everything up so eloquently, and for Jenny to help it run everything in the background, because without Jenny, none of this would work. So again, if you've got any questions, burning questions you want to ask, by all means, you can put it in chat. But apart from that, enjoy the rest of your afternoon. Take care, and we'll hopefully see you at